Season 5, Episode 9, A Prism Party and Colour Cascade. And a warning, this episode presents topics on workplace fatalities and suicide. Listener discretion is advised. In this episode, Sara and Trajce revel in the phenomenon of storytelling. It's like holding a crystal to the sky and seeing different colours refract when you spin it around, says Sara. Trajce concurs. Storytelling and narratives are prisms to view a different world. Trajce recounts a presentation that he and Sara did for a work, health and safety conference. Alan retorts, I remember that conference. I think there was some trivialisation of alcohol at that event. The crew continue to unpack the complexities of criminal law in workplace health and safety when the crimes are unintentional. The downside of workplace criminal law, Alan deducts, is that everyone suffers. Hello, and welcome to the Why Work podcast, a series of playful legal dissections on the most curious and alarming events in the world of work. The podcasters Alan Girl, Trajce Svetkovsky and Sara Pazell debate how to craft a better experience of work. Sit back, relax and enjoy. And remember, none of the things we talk about today should be construed as legal advice or any other type of advice. We're just here to talk about all things related to work.
Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. Educate your mind, cause
Trajce, we've got some good news on our teams who have been working on a book publication about healthcare insights. We just heard from the publisher that it will be released on the 7th of March. It's Healthcare Insights, Perspectives from the Consumer, the Practitioner, and the Work Design Strategist. And that's something really unique about human factors. We call it looking at system actors, and that's many points of view of anyone involved in the system. And to me, that's so cool. I don't know books that take multiple points of view in such a way. And we've done this now for healthcare. So we have, some of the stories that you might imagine are kind of challenge stories, people whose anesthesia didn't function the way it was designed to function, and they're awake during procedures, right? That's one of the earliest chapters. Patients or healthcare consumers who just have not felt listened to, and because they weren't listened to, the trajectory of their care just went the wrong way, spiraled downwards, right? Then you have the healthcare practitioner talking about the realities of their work and the real constraints, so that it's not blame oriented around, what the people are doing in their day-to-day jobs with a lot of love and care, and there's skill shortages and staffing shortages. And we hear about their experiences or their reorientation in how they think about the delivery of healthcare. Like David Beaumont, Positive Medicine, has really talked about how he's evolved his medical practice. And then there are aspects from the work design strategist. If you were taking a proper systems view and a cogent design strategy, how would you redesign this in an effective way? And we get those reflections. And I love that. Really thinking about the work as being a design medium, right? What's your purpose? What's your design philosophies? What are your concepts? What are your strategies? How could we improve it? And there's some real manageable, practical ways to make improvements. So hopefully the policymakers, the government, the big decision makers will listen. And I can't wait to promote this soon. So I think we're both just pushing the edge, looking at things like the crystal at the light with the slightly different colors, right? Yep. And this is part of the Workplace Insights series with Taylor and Francis. Yep. And Nectarios Karanikas from QT was an originator with the safety perspectives, and he wrote me in, as you will, and I jumped in and then got tangled in that web of being involved in this as a series editor. And now my friend Joe Boylan and I co-edited this book on healthcare insights.
Yeah, that's very exciting, and I think you're right. You're looking through the prism, and sometimes you see a different type of light often we can run with conventional or orthodox processes, and sometimes you miss the forest for the trees. It's often when you look at things from different angles and perspectives and storytelling and narratives, and that's something which we'll talk about soon, and that's your other publication, Sara.
Ergonomic Insights.
And the one that you've got with
we're
Elise.
working on now, we're working on another one with Elise Crawford, Dr. Elise Crawford from CQU on good work design. And that sets the precepts, the theoretical foundation. So it's a little more formal than some of the other books that have been storytelling. This one sets more of the grounded work and what I ramble on about here in this podcast.
Yes, I know about it because I'm involved.
You are. You're contributing too.
Yeah, and that's talk about, and Alan, you'll be interested in this. I'm not looking at good work design. I'm looking at just when there is bad work design and what happens at the end, and that beyond the prosecution, beyond even the conviction and beyond the sentence, but what's left. And that is the victim impact statement. What pieces are left for those who now have to get on with life? So I have put together a body of knowledge around what victim impact statements in the workplace look like, what they comprise by way of empathy mapping, and I've applied them into Sara's universe with good work design.
Now, I love that he's using empathy mapping because that's a design tool that we've been talking about, and that Tracie and I used in a presentation at Australian Institute of Health and Safety Visions Conference down in the Gold Coast, and you were at that function, Alan, and we looked at that for the distributed workforce, right? We looked at some personas and empathy maps, and now, guess what?
Yeah,
a past prosecuting state lawyer is using empathy maps. I don't know that this normally happens, so I'm excited.
It's never happened.
That's transferring design, tacit knowledge, baby.
I remember that conference. There was some trivialisation of alcohol at that conference.
Yeah, thank you. I'm telling you, after you read this, you're going to think, holy heck. And don't get me wrong, as you know, I'm the first to talk about alcohol. Don't get me wrong, but I don't trivialise it. But the thing is, so with this victim impact statement and empathy mapping, and Alan, lawyers could be interested because it's seen through a legal lens. However, it's been deconstructed by way of an empathy map where I have thematically clustered words, expressions and themes used by victims. And you might think, oh, wow, that's no big deal. Well, it is because no one else has done it. However, the second empathy map, and this is the real part that might interest practitioners, is I have empathy mapped what the courts, what the judges, what they say and how they feel, and that part that I'm interested in because that's a learning which could go back into the workplace to improve, better work conditions.
And for our listeners, empathy map are like thematic analysis where you extract what somebody has done or what they do, what they say, what they think, what they feel, what their pain points are and their gain points. In other words, it's a foundation that can help inform a very human-centered approach to resilience engineering. It helps you understand what do you better prop, the things that are their gain points, what do you support, what do you continue to build on, and then what do you need to solve, what problems, at a very granular level, what are the problems from all those points of view that require some resolution, and that's empathy mapping.
And victim impact statements, they just do not get a Guernsey in any literature. In fact, I was surprised at the amount of small amount of literature in criminology with victim impact statements around murder and all the I guess what we call the sort of cluster of typical crimes committed. There is a reasonably rich body of work there, but nothing on workplace related or industrial related catastrophes, serious injuries or deaths. So I've put them all together.
Trajce, I challenge you.
Ooh.
I challenge you.
Bring it.
I challenge you to do exactly the same exercise with those people that have been prosecuted.
Wow.
Oh,
okay.
Now that is excellent.
Yeah.
And you should be involved
Alan,
in that,
we should
Alan.
do this.
I know you're not into all the academia, but that is where we should get involved.
I could even make it easy for you. Where it's a company, just talk to the CEO.
You know what? I think there's some research in this, Alan.
No, that's excellent. That's a good
It's
corollary,
really good.
A little complement to this, the shadow side, right? Both sides. And that goes back to system actors, like I said, multiple points of view to understand the entire system.
Let's play with this.
That is good, Alan.
That's good because that's right. Because often, and I'll tell you why
everybody
it's a good.
suffers. Everybody suffers in those types of issues, right?
Here's the downside of the criminal law.
Yeah.
At the end of the process, often everyone's worse off.
Yeah, you know what? And the reason why your idea is excellent and it's a very good proposition is because when we think about crime in that ordinary through that ordinary lens, and you look at deviancy, you look at all the other things that perhaps what led to the commission of this crime, or it's just an opportunistic crime. There are a lot of different theories, whether they're choice theories, etc., in criminology. But when you look at workplace incidents, that are typified as a crime, none of those criminological theories are relevant at all, because not a single sane employer would consciously or actively want their worker or their employee to be injured or maimed or die.
Of course.
So
I think some of the aspects of criminology do apply, though. I think
yes,
some deterrent theory does apply. It gets a lot of airtime in the courtroom, of course.
Oh yes, I didn't mean I don't mean in terms
and I think
of
from a psychological perspective too, that where people feel they've committed an offence.
Yes.
They need for something to happen.
Yes. No, I didn't mean in terms of once the sentencing process occurs with general or specific deterrents. I meant motivation. So
there's also the aspect of those people that are where you have a person who's injured or killed.
Yes.
You tend to have people that are grieving either because of the injury or the death.
Yes.
And they have an emotional need.
That's right.
It's often not logical in my observation, but they still have a very passionate, red-hot need for some consequence.
And at what point does emotion and logic, go hand in hand, right? So
and that's why I explored the victim impact statement like that in that workplace context. But getting back to your point about how the defendants feel or how it's impacted their lives, I think is definitely uncharted territory, because enough's been done on interviewing prisoners and then after and what was the motivation for the crime. But my premise is this.
They're different types of crimes.
Correct.
So they're often crimes of passion when people end up in jail.
Yeah, or just opportunistic or drug related. But for me, I've been fascinated by work health and safety, how it's slotted into criminal jurisdiction, is because I do not know of any sane employer or any rational employer who would say, they'd wake up one morning and say, you know what? How am I going to harm my workers today?
I want to off that accountant in the back office.
Yes, no one's going to do that. So this is why I think it's a fantastic arena, because no one willingly. Sure, you've got your derelict employers, you've got your rogues who say get on that roof without edge protection.
For productivity's sake, rah-rah.
Or for productivity's sake. But you know what? They are really exceptions to the rule.
And I don't think they actually believe, even in those instances, that they wish to put the sacrificial lamb, right on the concrete slab. I don't think they actually think that somebody's going to get hurt or killed when they're making those decisions. I don't like to think that. I still like to believe the best in people, and that I don't think they're purposely wanting gladiators or sacrificial lambs out there.
Well, nobody wants to go to court, and nobody wants workers' comp premiums up. It's just irrational.
Educate your mind, 'cause the system will keep you blind.
Take us to the sunny state of Victoria again.
Yeah, look, I'd like to talk about two charges that are in the media. They're about the Dandenong Hospital, and you've given a warning at the beginning of this episode, and I just want to say that I won't be naming anyone as I describe these two cases. So, and that's because these are emotional cases for the people that were involved. The first case is they're both involving Dandenong Hospital, and Dandenong Hospital is run by Monash Health. And the first case involved a person who was in the mental health unit, had broken through or managed to get through security doors, and he had then had a scuffle with a nurse and hurt the nurse. And unfortunately, there is a statistically very high number of nurses getting injured. Hopefully that number can be reduced because it's out of place. But in this particular case, so we're talking about in 2017, the incident occurred. They had some security doors that opened and closed. The patient had managed to get through those security doors. He had already been assessed as showing aggressive behaviour, and he was in a high dependency unit, so he was drug affected. Now, that door opened and closed 1,000 times a day, and this was the first time in 4 years that a patient had got through that door. So earlier on we were talking about, recognising good performance, and the hospital had gone for 4 years, 1,000 times a day. No one had ever got through the door, and this was the first time it had happened. Now, that case it's as far as I can tell, it's still before the courts. I wouldn't be at all surprised if Monash Health was minded to argue that they had done everything that was reasonably practicable. Now, there's just in the last couple of weeks, we've had a further charge reported in the media, and that's where the facts behind this particular charge are that a person was taken into the mental health unit and she ended up committing suicide while she was in the mental health unit, and that's resulted in a charge against Monash Health. So there's no convictions, there's no findings, so we don't know what's going to happen, but potentially we could have 2 convictions against Monash Health for 2 separate occasions, first involving a nurse getting injured and the second involving a patient committing suicide. I find that really interesting because it gives rise to a whole lot of issues, like what is reasonably practicable, and in that first incident where they had 4 years of 1,000 times a day people going through the doorway and no one getting hurt. So that's a really interesting discussion. Also, looking after nurses, because nurses, frontline staff, we've talked about this before, they get hurt way too much, and they shouldn't be. And then in the second case, suicide. Suicide's a massive issue, and in that particular one, the immediate cause of a person's death in suicide is the person who died. They cause their own death by committing suicide. But then then you have to look a bit further back and say, well, why did they cause their own death? And is that a workplace issue? And is it that the workplace environment caused the person to take their own life?
Well, it's interesting because you've taken us to Victoria, and when you just said that, I immediately thought of Brodie's Law and the young cafe worker who 14 years ago, who took her own life with the most, just the most heinous bullying one can imagine. So from memory, both the entity, so the cafe itself as the PCBU, the person conducting the business or undertaking, and the owners or owner of the cafe.
There were 3 individuals charged.
That's right. Yes, and significant fines, and that forced, which is why there's that tension between what is described as an industrial crime and what is just a crime proper, because the criminal legislation in Victoria was amended, the so-called Brodie's Law, not necessarily the Victoria's 2004 Act. So I was heartened by that because it was a demonstration to the world at large that this is a crime, not an industrial crime, not industrial manslaughter. This is a crime. And I believe the legislature correctly amended the criminal, their equivalent to our Queensland's criminal code, their criminal statute, to cater for workplace-related crimes. And I thought that was a really interesting development in Victoria. But my point is, it was recognised back then about the causation, if you like, the manifestation of the crime occurred in a workplace environment.
Now, this is interesting. I'm going to make parallels with a conversation we had recently raised by Craig McDonald in the rail industry, right? Just to parallel for a moment, where he asked about responsibility if the government is curtailing expenditure on capital equipment and a rail provider needs to work within those provisions. Who's responsible when things don't go as designed? So in this case, in healthcare, you've got, I have friends who are executives in healthcare, and I hear all the time about the need to be responsive to regulators and investigators and how much time goes into that. That's taken away from core delivery services, or the constraints on budgets that markedly affects their ability to do staff-patient ratios in the way that they would prefer to. But when the rubber hits the road, when something really goes wrong, are those policymakers, are those regulators, are the governing bodies that farm out the money, are they responsible in any way?
Well, it's a fantastic example because we know that lots and lots of people die by committing suicide stepping in front of trains. And at the moment, the way platforms are designed, they're designed to protect people that don't want to commit suicide. So, we have the yellow line, stay behind the yellow line, and there's often some sort of bumps placed on the platform so people who are sight impaired know where the yellow line is. But none of that is going to protect a person who wants to commit suicide. None of that's going to stop a person who wants to step out in front of the train, which, of course, has tragic consequences for lots of people. Now, let me hand it back to you in a second. If we're going in the direction of saying the railway providers have to protect individuals against themselves committing suicide, well, we might see platforms built like we see overseas, where you can't get on the train. There's locked doors and the doors open, marrying up with the doors of the carriage, and you can't step in front of the train.
Yes, and indeed, you've just reminded me, we had a spate of matters coming across our desk involving bridge
Jumpers.
Bridge jumpers.
I was just about to say bridge jumpers.
Bridge. And there was a lot of discussion, not all tiers of government, state and local, so the second and third tier of government, about creating various cages and various bars. And it didn't eventuate, because I think the conclusion was that the size of the guardrails were adequate for most people, like it's a utilitarian argument, but there was discussion, and that just reminded me of what you're saying. You create a train platform where there is no room, so they were going to completely enclose the bridge to prevent.
You can't jump.
So you can't jump. So, yeah, these are vexed issues.
I've climbed the Story Bridge a couple of times for work, and if you look at the bridge and a lot of the crosswalks around Brisbane, for example, since you're mentioning that.
Some of our listeners will be worried it wasn't to jump.
No, thanks for that context. For work, right?
For work.
Context of work. I love my work. I go in all kinds of funny places, and bridge climbing was one of them. So you'll find that there are structures where they've created this sort of curved and spiky little barriers around the bridge. What it does help prevent are the drunken, spontaneous moments. But somebody who's really in crisis and has a plan to execute this, it won't stop them, right? So it will stop more the mistakes, I think I'm Superman in this moment because I'm high as a kite, whatever. It'll stop sort of that. It'll make a little bit more of a barrier, but that's certainly not going to stop somebody with strong intentions to commit suicide.
And look, I think it's all coming to a head because all those services that report on deaths and serious injuries in the workplace, only now they're starting to bring into their reports the numbers of people that are committing suicide and the numbers of people who are seriously injured as a result of self-harm, and saying, well, we're going to count that as a workplace incident. So by counting as a workplace incident, they're saying that somehow the workplace was involved in that decision to commit suicide or to self-harm.
Yes, it's an interesting observation that you made. It's a tough conversation to have. It's mentioning suicide. Interestingly, workers dying of natural causes, whether it's some type of occlusion, a heart attack, heart failure, sclerosis, or whatever, they are counted in the data. But you're right. I'm not sure whether suicide, and our viewers could correct us.
I think on the material published so far, if Safe Work Australia reports on suicide, it's not counting it completely.
Yes,
as I think you're right. It will count in the future.
So I wonder, is this a really
tough conversation to have, but we have to have it. You have a person at work, and irrespective of the proximity or whether causation is an issue or not, it still occurred at the workplace, just like a person dying of natural causes. It occurred at the workplace, but it's difficult. I don't think there's a lot of conversation around it.
I want to hand to Sara, but I'm going to throw a bit more fuel on the fire before I do, and that's I'm seeing in my professional capacity that people are starting to weaponise claims that they've been bullied or harassed or that they're upset and there should be some consequence because they're upset. We need to bring that under control. What should employers be doing to manage that change in our the way we look at the world? Can we design work so that we're in a defensible position to say we actually care about the well-being of our workers and we care about their mental health well-being, and we want to be able to, we want that to be demonstrable. We want to be able to produce material showing that we're caring for our workers.
Can I throw a word at you that's actually I've been itching to throw since you've just brought it to that point in the discussion, and Trajce is our wordsmith. So Trajce, this is a Greek word, eudaimonia.
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 I don't even know that word.
No.
Sometimes anglicized as eudaimonia and eudaimonia. Greek word literally translated to the state or condition of good spirit.
From
so
euphoria,
health, well-being,
I suppose.
euphoria.
Yep.
That's right. The good positive use.
Yeah. Eureka.
Eureka.
Yeah, okay. And
activity linked with dividing or dispensing in a good way. So what I'm hearing Alan say is, what activities are happening to create a sense of eudaimonia in the business?
Well, how can we demonstrate that that as a business we're doing all that's reasonably practicable to make sure that everyone is as of good mental health as they can be. Now, of course, you can rush straight to the code of practice, but that's actually a very difficult document to implement.
It is, because as we've talked before, it just talks about hazards, and hazards are potentials that only matter in context to task, environment, situation, scenario, person, etc. And with their interacting exposures and exposure levels and hazard response time and latency and risk of what to whom and who's vulnerable in the business. And what you're starting to talk about, Alan, is trying to determine and filter a knowledge on who's vulnerable in the business, and the way in which they interpret the occurrences at work can vary among different people. We all might have different aggregates and triggers. So your risk assessment starts to look at cohorts, which you're talking about in the law, the reasonableness, the practicalness of responses. All the outliers are much harder to manage. We must think about the outliers. We've talked about this ad infinitum about consequences.
And we have to manage them. We can't ignore them.
You cannot ignore them,
there
right?
can't be outliers
There's not a lot of quality risk assessments in the psychosocial space.
No.
And I say this very clearly about risk assessment. There's hazard identification tools left, right, and center.
Oh, yeah.
Hazard identification methods.
Yep.
But risk should tell us about risk of what, for whom, and what type of event, acute or cumulative exposures might arise. That's a much harder equation,
So what
distinction in workplace dynamics.
Yeah, what most employers will want is they'll say, we absolutely don't want anyone hurt, but if someone is hurt, we want to be able to demonstrate that we had done all that we reasonably could to prevent it from happening in the first place.
And beyond just being hurt, we want to create eudaimonia. We want activity.
Yeah, I mean, the psychosocial are definitely, as I call them, the intangibles, so it's including the outliers. But before you said potential hazard, there are actual hazards, the more tangible and the more finite, the obvious ones. Like we know, for example, I always use that phrase, gravity will never be kind if you're on a roof without edge protection. That's a tangible hazard. Let's not get academic about it. It's a hazard. if you're up more than 2.4 metres,
Yes, but
you're going to probably die.
a hazard.
I'm being dramatic.
What?
You're being
All right.
dramatic.
Come
You're being
on, that's
And we
dramatic.
shouldn't put a height on it because it doesn't matter how high you are.
Yes, but I'm just looking at the regulation. But what I'm saying is, if you're above a certain
But just
acceptable
for
level.
clarity, it doesn't mean that if you're below that height that you're not
Oh, no,
gonna get a
absolutely.
bus.
I've done step ladder matters where somebody unfortunately has done themselves a mischief on 50 centimetres. But my point is, that's an obvious hazard height.
Hazard exposure. You're talking about the hazard exposure.
Yeah.
Oftentimes safety managers go through energy sources and hazard exposures, but the human factors, or ergonomists, work design strategists will say it still depends on context. What task are you doing in what
Yes.
scenario, in what environment? And it's still a potential. A hazard
Yeah, I see
hasn't
what you're
happened.
saying.
It's like
Isolated,
you're saying
yeah.
the fall might be the risk,
Yeah.
right? A risk of a fall to whom? And it
Yes.
it magnifies if you start to think about, well, because they're wearing slippery shoes and it's a wet day and it's a windy day and it's blowing them off that roof, right? Context matters so much.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
No, I was going to say, no. Forget the shoes, forget all your context, forget your environmental conditions. No, a nice, big, fat, Australian standard approved 3 rows
Somehow,
well, it'll be
somehow we have to
irrelevant.
go back to the Australian
It'll be
standard.
it'll be
dear.
irrelevant, Sarah. You're not going to fall. So and if you're Birdman, you won't fall with or without it. But yeah, we just want to be careful. We don't over intellectualize the obvious, which is, for example, if you don't have those rudimentary obvious. This is why let's get to hierarchy of control. There are recent reminders about. Remember about your hierarchy of control working at
Trace,
home.
you've just given an example of a case you had where someone fell 50 centimetres
Yes.
and suffered a serious
Yeah.
injury. I think it might have been, even said it was a fatality.
It was a step ladder. Yeah, unfortunately, temple was struck, and it was just
And
unfortunate.
I've had cases where people have fallen 5 metres and haven't been hurt.
Yeah, I know. I've had 18 metres, but let's compare.
18
So let's-
metres and
18
not
metres.
hurt.
And didn't-
Yeah,
wow.
this was in Mauritius, quickly before Mauritius on the river. This is amazing. It was the classic. Didn't have the harness on. Our listeners will love this one. Didn't have the harness on. Just had to get the so-called last lick of paint. So they overreach. Whoop! And one of the witnesses was having his breakfast, and he saw a fellow just go bump. Bump,
Oh,
bump.
no.
He used his right arm to reduce the impact of each 3-metre balcony. He'd go bump, 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 18 metres, so 6 times 3, and he landed on his coccyx, was discharged after 2 hours.
What?
Please don't try this at home. I'm just saying.
Sarah, how is that possible?
How is that possible? Birdman? I don't know.
Birdman.
That was
So let's-
so life is strange. That's all I'm saying.
Life is strange.
But he should have had that damn harness.
So let's bring this back to Alan's discussion. Victoria Hospital healthcare systems and responsibilities and good work design.
I think this is just my opinion. My opinion is we're about to have an explosion. And the explosion is going to be the work health and safety space is going to explode with mental health cases, including suicides, not just suicides, but mental health, because we don't keep good statistical records about those sort of things. Not yet. I'm sure we will in the coming years. And when we do keep those statistical records, the stats are going to be mind-blowing.
We also don't help employers yet with a really cogent work design strategy. It's so unfamiliar and unknown. There's a lot of information all over the place. It's very loose, it's disparate, it's not well integrated to help inform what methods should I use? How do I identify who's vulnerable in my business? Where do I go next? How do I prioritize my action? And I get asked this all the time. I've mentioned this to you guys. An occupational psychologist might have gone into the business and identified 30 hazards and put a few rating scales of red, orange, and yellow. But there's not a really workable plan about how to address it. And it's only hazard identification. It's not yet giving tasks and jobs and who's vulnerable and the environment and the context, the scenarios in a really granular level.
And there's layers upon layers. And what is very common, and I'm looking at the moment happening in Tasmania, is that you'll have an allegation that relates to mental health, bullying or harassment, and then it'll be investigated. And the investigation goes on for months In this particular case, it's gone on for a year.
Oh.
And the amount of stress
Exhausting.
for everyone.
Absolutely.
It doesn't matter what the final outcome is. The amount of stress that investigation is causing is enormous.
Yeah. So would you describe this development as we use the word explosion, as a bomb that's just been dropped, or is it a dormant bomb that's been lying under the subsurface and now it's been excavated and it's going to go off?
Well, I think my analogy starts to fall apart. But
No, I love it, because I'm going to talk about bombs and
maybe
explosion.
my metaphor that falls apart.
No, I love it.
So I'm going to talk because I think it was always there. We just weren't looking at it.
Yes, because what I want to talk about later on today in another session is bombs exploding, just lying dormant, literally bombs exploding. So when you use the word explosion, I thought...
Now, I haven't read anything in the news recently of a bomb exploding.
No, but I'm about to tell you about a case involving an exploding bomb. It's work-related, but not yet. We'll let our listeners listen in. But we've seen, haven't we, Sarah? We've seen the spike. We've seen the increase in psychosocial claims, along with musculoskeletal disorders. They're concurrent. They're now hand in glove.
That's right. And employers are a little bit nervous when you start to bring training into the business about a topic, a hazard exposure. It tends to show a spike then in claims because there's more awareness about what's possible, right?
Of course. You're right, because suddenly, as you said before, people might become more aware.
That's a really good point. There's nothing worse than training that just talks about the legislation. You have to give actual examples of, if you're talking about sexual harassment, you've got to give an example of what is sexual harassment, and you've got to give an example of what's not sexual harassment. And if it's bullying, what's bullying and what's not bullying. And if it's mental health, we're going to have to start giving examples about what's a psychosocial risk that might give rise to a claim and what's not a psychosocial risk that will give rise to a claim.
And there's all kinds of surveys going out like crazy, right, about exposures to occupational violence, exposures to psychosocial ill health, any hazards related. I'm always cautious about surveys that are leading, that say, have you been bullied in the last week? Well, actually, I don't like the way Tracie looked at me this week.
So we're seeing that's
I'm
right.
always cautious with survey design. Any researcher.
I'm always trying to get Tracie to look at me.
That's right. Yeah, that's it. Look the other way. But you're right. And then you've got the surveys. Yeah, they're a funny little thing, aren't they? Surveys and
funny little thing.
And why they're given and why they're presented and you're right, how the questions are framed. So, but we've definitely seen an increase. So whether that's because people are more aware or whether genuinely workplaces have become more toxic and people now have an avenue and a vehicle to express
I don't think they're becoming more toxic. I think we're just becoming more vocal and aware.
More empowered.
More empowered and maybe over-empowered.
Ooh. Over-empowered.
Ooh,
I'm certainly seeing claims of bullying being weaponised.
With the weaponization of occupational psychosocial standards, codes of practice, hazard exposure. That's interesting. And again, we've talked about sort of the cultural interpretation of when you have harmony at work or not, or disharmony.
This is explosive.
But you often also get a situation where there's disharmony, and I'm not suggesting any faults by anyone, but you have disharmony, and it's in a situation where there's disharmony that claims of bullying might be weaponised.
Yes, if it's a toxic workplace, if it's not a place of peace and harmony.
It doesn't necessarily have to be toxic.
Yeah.
The employer might be not at fault. They might be engaged in reasonable management action, and in response to the reasonable management action, the person who's being managed suddenly says, I'm being bullied, and that's when the bullying is
They
recognised.
might just dislike a rule, but it doesn't mean that it was a toxic workplace, right? And they can use this, a lever, any lever. You're saying there's more levers
There's
now.
more levers. There's
Right.
more levers.
Okay, we see. So,
Do you say lever or lever? Australian American.
Lever.
Lever. I think
What do you
Americans say, well, I don't know now. I'm asking.
Lever.
Like, I've been in both countries, so it's like a
Lever.
lever, a lever.
And you leverage though.
They
You
probably say
leverage the
something different in
levers.
Adelaide.
You leverage the levers.
Might be an Adelaide thing. You
Might be
guys.
lover.
That's right. Isn't it true?
A lever, a lever, a lover, a
people
lever,
from,
a lever.
Isn't people from South Australia or Adelaide especially boast about how there were no convicts? It's the only convict-free state.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that might connote a different type of accent. I don't know. Sorry, all our Adelaide listeners.
Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Create a new path, don't let the people follow your signs. In my lifetime, I followed the wrong.
We hope you enjoyed that episode of Why Work. You've been listening to Trajce, Sara and Alan. And if you'd like to know more about some of the things we've talked about today, please subscribe and we'd be more than happy to provide you with information, names of cases and other things that may interest you. Please be aware that none of the matters we've talked about today should be construed as legal advice or any other type of advice. We're just here to talk about all things related to work. See you next time.
All my life, an authority hater. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate your mind, cause the system will keep you blind. Educate